Hi, my name is Jonah, and I'm the social media manager for Sports Reference. I'm also a fantasy football player. For years, I read all the experts, drafted all the trendy sleepers, and then watched as my teams were out of the playoff picture by week 8. However, after I started working for the company that operates Pro Football Reference, I started thinking about fantasy in a different way. I began using the data on the site to do my own research, and I actually won my league a couple years ago. So, with fantasy draft season approaching, I wanted to make this video to show you how to use PFR to become a fantasy expert. Now, I'm not saying that if you watch this video, you'll win your league, but what I am going to do is show you how to use Pro Football Reference to build the best possible fantasy team. So whether you're a daily fantasy junkie, a person juggling a dozen different teams, or just someone who's tired of always coming in last in your office's fantasy league, this video is going to be a must-watch. To begin your fantasy research, I'd recommend becoming familiar with the player pages. In addition to traditional stats, every player page has a section showing their fantasy stats. There you can see basic information like fantasy points, player ranking, both overall and position, and something called VBD. VBD is kind of like WAR for fantasy players. It shows how many fantasy points a player scored above the baseline player. The baseline player is the worst player who should have been a regular starter at their position in a 12-team league. So, for example, in a 12-team league where every team starts one quarterback, the 12th best quarterback is the baseline, and you can see how many points every quarterback above him scored over the baseline. One important note, all fantasy points on the site use NFL.com's scoring system. Scrolling back up to the top, you can see a lot more information than just points by going to the Fantasy tab. On this page, you can see a player's red zone stats, snap counts, and FanDuel and DraftKings scoring data. You can see all this information for every game in a season as well as the full season itself. There are a couple of other options on the menu bar that fantasy players should explore. If you go to touchdowns, you can pull up a player's touchdown log. This will give a list of every TD scored by that player, sortable by a range of factors like distance, quarter, and score. The Splits tab also has a lot of crucial fantasy info. This page will give a player's stats in a variety of different situations, or splits, if you will. For example, if you remember back to when DeMarco Murray was on the Eagles, one of the reasons he struggled so much is that he was a less effective runner in Chip Kelly's shotgun formations. Well, one of the splits we track is snap type. If a player is making a similar kind of system change, you can scroll down to the advanced splits section and see how that player did under center versus out of the shotgun. In addition to standard splits like opponent and home away, there are many advanced splits like field position, down, and score differential. The latter stat will be especially important as you look for quarterbacks and running backs, as it can help you see who was able to pad their stats in relatively advantageous situations and whose numbers may look a little worse because they had to press because of the game situation. That's how you can dig up information on a single player. But what if you want to look through a list of multiple players to find ones to target? There's a few different ways to do that on PFR depending on what you need to find. One good place to start is the Fantasy Stats section of the site. You can get to this section from any page on PFR by scrolling to the footer and clicking Fantasy. There are 3 different kinds of stats you can research from the main Fantasy page: red zone, defense, and matchups. Each of those is then further split by position. Red zone stats are what they sound like: player stats within the opponent's 20-yard line. As any football fan knows, these are the best scoring opportunities that a player will have. So it's important to see who excels in the red zone so you can get those crucial fantasy points that come from touchdowns. But just as important is to see who gets the opportunity to excel in the red zone. That's why, in addition to stats like catches and touchdowns, we also publish targets and percentage of team carries. If one player is getting the bulk of a team's red zone carries, or a disproportionate number of targets in the red zone, they're going to be more likely to score. For example, Golden Tate led last year's Lions in targets with 135. However, inside the red zone, Anquan Boldin was actually targeted more than Tate, and as a result, ended the season with more touchdowns. It's important to keep in mind that all red zone opportunities are not created equal. A running back who gets a handoff on the 3-yard line is far more likely to score than one who gets the ball on the 19. As a result, the red zone section also includes numbers on plays inside the 10 and inside the 5. The next section is defensive stats. On this page, we track how many fantasy points every defense allowed to players at a given position. This information will be very useful once the season is underway, as you try to set a lineup and need info on the defenses your players are facing that week. While you could just check running or passing stats, those won't necessarily tell you whether a team is particularly vulnerable to pass-catching running backs or especially good at stopping tight ends, not to mention the fact that this page includes fantasy points as well as standard stats. The matchups page puts all this information together. This page will show you a player's stats, snap counts, and fantasy numbers in the season up to that point. It'll also show the opponent that the player is facing and their defense's numbers against other players at the same position. Using the two, our site comes up with projected rankings for every week. Whether you're a daily fantasy user picking a new team each week, or a player in a traditional league picking your starters and or looking for a bye-week replacement, you'll want to bookmark these pages to cut down on the agony of Sunday morning lineup tweaking. In addition to the fantasy pages, there are a few play index tools that any fantasy player will want to be familiar with. I'll go into them briefly here, but for a more thorough look at the play index, make sure to check out our Play Index 101 series. The first tool is the Play Finder. This tool can search every play in the PFR database to give you either a list of matching plays or cumulative player stats for all the plays that match the search criteria. In English, this tool is how you can see which quarterbacks perform the best on third down or in the 2-minute drill. In addition to those uses, the Play Finder will let you pull up the same sort of red zone stats from earlier, but with the ability to narrow or expand the range of plays even further. For example, one way I like to find sleepers is by looking at just the final few games of a season. Players with heavy usage in the last few weeks of a season may not have great numbers for the year as a whole, but that usage could portend a larger role in the following year. That's why an aspiring champion would want to look through red zone stats for just games 13 through 16, in addition to the full year numbers we talked about earlier. You can also use the Play Finder to look up stats by play direction. If you want to see what quarterbacks tend to throw more deep passes, or which receivers tend to be targeted on short routes more often, this is the tool to use. Lastly, because the sample size of an NFL season is much smaller than basketball or baseball, you can see some crazy spikes or dips from year to year. In the Play Finder, you can query stats for multiple years to get a better picture of a player's true talent. The same is true of the Season and Game Finder if you don't need the kind of narrow splits that you can get in the Play Finder. The Season Finder will query full season stats, while the Game Finder runs stats for a single game. The Game Finder can also add up stats over a range of games using the cumulative games options. So again, if you want to look at stats from just the first 4 or last 4 games of a season, that's a great tool to use. Both tools have fantasy points as well as traditional stats, so you can look up whichever you need. Lastly, there's some good information to be found in the Touchdown Finder. You can look up touchdowns by distance, scoring margin, or even receiver and quarterback tandem. If you're someone who really agonizes over your kicker, we have a field goal finder for you, although you're probably not going to do very well in your league. All of this research will help you target veterans, but what about the rookies? Since they don't have any NFL stats, you might think an NFL stats site would be the wrong place to turn to find rookies for your fantasy team. However, that's not true. We actually have a lot of information that will help you find the next Dak Prescott. On PFR's sister site, College Football Reference, you'll find college football stats for this year's group of incoming rookies. There's also a play index, just like the football site, for you to do more advanced research. For example, if you want to see quarterbacks who had college stats similar to Mitch Trubisky, this is the place to do it. Back on PFR, there are also filters in the Season Finder for draft information. That means you can look at the kind of production to expect from, to pick some examples, rookie running backs drafted in the top 5, receivers drafted out of the SEC, or 7th rounders. So that was just a quick overview of all the fantasy football information that you can find on Pro Football Reference. Now all that's left is to start researching, and to make sure that no one else in your league finds out about our site. If you have any questions about the video, or are looking for something we didn't mention here, or just need help using the site, feel free to contact us. We're on Twitter, where our handle is @PFREF. That's @PFREF. Or you can send us an email using the contact form linked to in the footer of the site. For more information on how to get the most out of the Sports Reference family of sites, visit our YouTube channel or check out these other videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.